Welcome to Fixated, the Fixed Income Podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Moran, Editorial Director of Fixed Income News Australia. Join me as I talk about the latest news, views and education in fixed income investment. I'll be joined by industry experts from Australia and across the globe. Welcome. Today, in celebration of International Women's Day, we have Amy Xie Patrick, who is Head of Income Strategies from Pendal Group. Hello, Amy. How are you today?
Hi, Liz. I'm really well, thank you. And thanks a lot for having me on.
Oh, I'm looking forward to our discussion. Amy has a very interesting background, and let's kick off. Have you always loved numbers, Amy?
Numbers. I'm from a Chinese family. I'm a first-generation immigrant. And one of the first things I remember, getting to the UK, my dad was a university professor. He just said, you've got to be comfortable with numbers. You've got to be comfortable working with numbers. And so he really focused on the math side of my education in my earlier years. And because I developed that confidence, I suppose, with numbers earlier on, I wouldn't say that I'm particularly good with numbers, but I just feel confident working with them. So I wouldn't call myself a purist in any sense, right? Mathematically, statistically, there are so many people I meet every day who are much better at numbers than I am. But what I really like about numbers, and I think what I've always liked about numbers, is the stories that they can tell. And this is particularly applicable in the world of finance because we're surrounded by numbers every day. They're telling us how companies are doing, how markets are doing, how economies are doing. And depending on how you slice and dice the numbers, you can almost get them to tell any story that you want. So then what intrigues me about numbers today is how do you get to the truth? So I'm not a numbers geek by any stretch of the imagination. I don't particularly like maths, generally speaking. My mental arithmetic is absolutely terrible, but I like numbers in the stories and the narratives that they're able to tell.
Oh, that's such an interesting perspective. So then you didn't study mathematics at university?
I absolutely didn't. So, to tell you probably not so secret, I didn't even want to do the course that I ended up doing. So I ended up doing economics. And I did economics again because being a first generation immigrant and parents who had known the Cultural Revolution, had known extreme poverty in their younger days, didn't want to put their children through that, obviously, right? Didn't want to put their only child through that. And so, we looked across, my parents looked across all the typical types of jobs that Asian parents typically want their children to do, right? Are you going to be a doctor, a banker, or a lawyer? And I didn't want to be a doctor because I found blood too gruesome and I didn't, like the heavy weight of responsibility of needing to save people's lives, as good as that might have been. I didn't consider myself a very argumentative. So lawyer was out of the question for me. So then, banker. And then what's the most logical course to take to be that? Well, economics. What I really wanted to do though, Liz, was psychology. So I came up through the UK high school system. And back then, you could choose, so between the ages of 16 and 18, you could choose sort of 3 mini majors, as it were. And most of them are pretty, down the line. Economics, maths, obviously it was going to be maths. I actually also took French, but that was just, to broaden interest. But the one that I really liked was psychology. And even to this day, I would say that where my passion takes me is often in the area of psychology. It applies so much to everything that we see and we do in finance, right? When I think about it, just with my investor hat on, how do I challenge myself every day to be a better investor? It's, by this stage of my career, and I've been doing this for 20 years, it's not how well I know my bond maths, It's not how well I know how to read a prospectus on a new credit issue. It is the softer skills. Like, how do I hold myself to account for the poor decisions that I've made? How do I learn from those decisions that I've made? How do I develop a system of being able to objectively reflect on my process and to take it and to make sure that the next round of decisions I make is at least as good, if not better? That all comes down to psychology. And then you take it a step further and you think about the way that the markets behave and an economy behaves, right? It is deeply psychological. It gets to a point where you can actually distill it down to numbers, and that's where the economics comes in. But even in economics, I always found myself far more drawn to the behavioral side of economics than just, the pure maths components of it. And, within market behavior? What is it about sentiment that when it goes beyond or below a certain point suddenly tips the market the other way? I think all of that requires you to be open to the idea that, psychology is kind of at the heart of almost everything, every industry, right? How we behave, how we relate to each other as humans. So I studied economics. I didn't do maths. I didn't particularly like the mathsy side of economics. I really liked the behavioral side, the psychological side.
So could you do some psychology within the economics degree, or have you just read widely since? Is that part of what interests you?
Yeah, definitely. So within the degree that I did, so the UK educational system, especially university system, it's it's about as old school as you can get, right? It's very purist in their thinking. So I've learned since my time in Australia that the Australian university system is quite different. So we are quite vocational over here in Australia. We kind of design degrees that will actually inform and skill people for whatever path they choose further on in their careers. The UK system is very archaic. It's got this very idealistic view that you go to university because it's a place where you learn to think, and I love that as well. I see pros for both sides, but when you go to university to learn how to think, they actually call it reading a subject. You don't go to study economics; you go to read economics. You just spend all your time immersed in this one topic. So the UK university system isn't really designed for you to go and explore all these other little tangentials that might arise on the way. My degree was very much just economics, but like I said, before my degree, after my degree, everything takes me back to my interest in psychology. So I I spend a lot of time reading and absorbing information that is to do with human behavior, human psychology, mindset. I was walking um, on my daily commute today, and the podcast that I was listening to was talking about the difference between guilt and shame. And I immediately thought about the ways that I used to feel earlier in my career as a trader. Whenever I made a bad trade, and that just basically means I lost money, I felt shame. But what I should have felt was guilt. And the way that this podcast, broke it down for me this morning was shame is when you internalize the behavior as an identity. So when I felt shame, I felt like I am a bad trader. I shouldn't be doing this. Like, this is what I'm messing things up so badly, and I am inherently bad. And when you start from that perspective as an investor, as a trader, where do you go? Like, you've already defined yourself as a bad trader. How are you going to rise from that, right? But when you separate it and you call it guilt, I made a bad call. I'm not a bad trader. I think I have the potential to make good decisions, but I made a bad call. So let me look at that behavior and let me identify what led me to that bad call. And can I change? What could I have changed, and what will I change the next time I make the decision? Now all of a sudden there's all this potential for growth ahead of us, right? When we take that mindset. So that's why I like it. That's why I like the psychological aspect of all of this.
So I'm going to digress a little bit because it's really interesting. You were talking about processes to change your behaviour, and I'm going to talk a little bit of psychology here. But for me, as an editor, writer, analyst, whatever I did or whatever any of my assistants did, my question was always, how can I make this even better? So it wasn't like I want to be excellent. How can I make this even better? Not, oh, is it good enough? It was never good enough because the words weren't quite right, or the structure wasn't quite right, or I forgot this point. So it was, how could I make it even better? And I often, in my own work life, have tried to step away and then go back to it, some hours later. But I guess in your role, you probably can't necessarily do that. If a bond comes up and it's, within a range that you feel comfortable with, you need to decide to buy or sell at that particular point. Is that fair?
Yeah. So you're talking about the ability to have the time and the space to distance yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're absolutely right. So in the world of markets, the markets don't stop for anyone. They don't sleep for anyone. But again, I would argue that you have more control over the decision point than you think you do, right? You're right. Things come up all the time. So whether it's a new bond that I must decide today whether I need to buy it, if the resources aren't available to me to make what I know is a good decision, whether that decision is a yes or no, I can simply choose to say no, right? Because missing out on what could have been a good opportunity, I can make up for that by making good decisions later on. But, you know, making decisions at gunpoint, being forced to take on a position just out of FOMO, from a place of fear or greed is never where we make the best investment decisions. So once you recognize, if you give yourself and it doesn't take long to recognize whether you're making that decision out of fear and greed or whether you're making an actually very well considered decision. If you know that you're having a gut reaction and making a decision because of that, what I tend to do is I just say, you know what, I'll pass. I'll pass because I haven't had enough time to think about it. I need to make that distance for myself.
I think that's a fabulous thing to say, because a lot of investors particularly are worried they're going to miss out, and they haven't read all the documents properly, or there's some of the terms they don't understand, or there's things they don't know, but they can see, it's a good opportunity or it's an attractive yield, or and so they buy. But it's okay to say no, and it may not have been the right decision, but you've given yourself the space to think about it, or perhaps trade at a later date.
Yeah, and if you give yourself that space to think about it, maybe what you will realize is, oh, it was a really attractive yield for a good reason. Because all these terms that I didn't have the time to understand before they were forcing me to make a decision are all the terms that would work against me and in favor of the issuer when things go really wrong. But I need that protection as an investor. So actually, the yield that they were offering to compensate me for that extra risk, I never considered to be enough in the first place. So what a good job that I passed. Maybe that's the kind of conclusion that you come to when you've had more time to look at it and think about it.
Oh, I like that. But let's go back to your life, because I think it's really interesting. So you did your economics degree and you thought, what am I going to do with this? How did you decide finance, or what led you into it? Was there some sort of job that looked half attractive to you that you took? Or
So this is when I've often described this part of my career in the past, I call it how I stepped off the conveyor belt. Now, the conveyor belt was very much, from the way that my dad was thinking: be good at maths, be confident with numbers, do an economics degree because you're not going to be a lawyer or a doctor. So banking seems to be the way forward. And then when I was at uni, we got to attend these massive functions called milk rounds. I don't know whether they exist in Australian universities, but really big investment banks and management consultants and even sort of government agencies, they come and set up little stalls in a big hall at the university. And as university students, you just go around because you collect a lot of freebies, right? I remember collecting so many mouse pads. Who needs that many mouse pads? But during those milk rounds, I think it was it was a classmate of mine who just said, "Oh, have you heard about investment banking?" And I was like, I think I know what both words mean, but I don't really know what you're talking about. And he said, well, it's one of the most prestigious things, so you've got to go for it. And then that part of my brain that my dad had honed so well, which was, just go for the prize, go for the prize. I was like, okay, I don't know what it is, but clearly we need to go for it, right? And so after university, or in the penultimate year of my university, the people who were going for this prize seemed to be going for internships at the major investment bank. So I went for an internship at Merrill Lynch, now Bank of America. And after the Merrill Lynch internship, I didn't get a job offer, and I was devastated. I was like, "But other people got job offers. I didn't get a job offer." Okay, it must have been because the competition was too tough in that particular bank, or I didn't know enough to be able to, pass the minimum threshold. And so then I spent my last year at university cramming for finals, but also just spreading my applications far and wide to all the bulge bracket US investment banks, and also really swatting up on what investment banking really was. And to be honest, by the time I finally got a job in an investment bank, so this was after I graduated, in late 2003 was when I started on the graduate program at Citibank in London. And then 2004 was when I started trading. Even at the beginning of that, I don't think I really understood still what investment banking was, let alone what the whole of finance was. But this is what I mean. This is just it was the conveyor belt, and it led me there, and I stepped off there. That's how I ended up in my career in finance. So it's funny because these days I meet a lot of young people who have aspired for a career in finance for a really long time, since a really young age. Maybe they were surrounded by parents who are investors who really loved reading up about the financial markets, and they taught them a thing or two along the way. Maybe they've even invested themselves from a fairly young age as well. And they seem to me like genuinely passionate investors. I wasn't that person. I just stepped off the conveyor belt, and it took me to a trading seat at a global investment bank, and there my career started.
So moving right along, hopefully you're not on the conveyor belt, but how did you end up in Australia? You worked in other countries as well?
So the Australia bit is easy. I married an Aussie, and when we met, shortly after we met, he said, "Look, you can clearly tell that I'm Australian. I really want to go back to Australia." And by that point, I think he'd been in the UK for about 15, 16 years. And he said, and I want to go back to Australia, not when I'm old and grey. I want to, live the second part of my working life in Korea, in Australia as well. And I said, "Well, hold on a minute. I've never been that far. How about we just take a trip?" One thing led to another, and eventually I just thought, leaving behind drizzly, grey, cold London for sunny, blue-skied Sydney with lots of beaches, and we had young kids when we moved as well. That was a bit of a no-brainer. So that's how I ended up in Australia. But how I ended up in this part of finance, so very different to how I started my career. What I described at the beginning with Citigroup was I was in a trading seat. What did that mean? That meant that I was a market maker, right? It's very different to investing. Market making means you provide liquidity to end customers who want to either buy or sell. So I would, put up a price where I would buy, put up a price where I would sell, and I'd have to be happy to buy or sell at those two prices. And then whatever position I was given, I had to decide, do I want it, or do I want to offset it? Do I want to hedge it? Do I want to get rid of it? And so it was very fast paced, and it never left me feeling like I could form a proper view about the directionality of markets. Whenever I got that view right, I could never hold on to any position that would make me money, because since the view was right and I was positioned for it, and the market moved in the way that I wanted it to, customer would take me out of that position. Whenever I got a view wrong, I would always suffer big losses with it, because again, I would make my prices and then I'd be given the position that was wrong to carry, and I'd have to keep carrying that against the way that the market was moving. I found that incredibly frustrating. It gave me no clarity on why I was here. It gave me no sense of or where can I add value to this whole process. And I think it was just a lucky time to have been in the markets in that period, because between 2004 and 2007, so right up to the GFC, it was you could buy anything and make money, right? So I think I was just lucky in that I was saved in that earlier part of my career. I didn't know which way was up, but everything went up anyway, so that was okay. But I never liked that sense of not really knowing why I was there. But luck would have it that I would get headhunted to the buy side. Now, in this industry, when we say buy side, sell side usually means the banks. They're the price, setting the prices, making the markets. And the buy side are the investors. They tend to have a longer term time horizon in how they view the markets. And the hedge fund that I got headhunted to um, really thought like investors. They did deep analysis. They challenged each other's views in a very collaborative way, and they held each other to account for the decisions that were being made. I mean, your P&L always holds you to account anyway, but the investment process was very robust. And I realized, this is why I'm here, because we're at the point where we can have an influence over the way that the money flows, right? And taken to its logical conclusion, if you've got that kind of responsibility, then you've got to put that to good use as well. So, and that's where my passion for investing really started to grow. I didn't know about investing and the difference between investing and trading before then, but at what once I joined the buy side, I realized that what I really liked was being able to do the analysis and then put a position on to back up my analysis. And every day that position would get tested or proven by the market. And that to me is was one of the first sort of realizations of, oh, this is why I find this satisfying. And then later on in my career, I think I find it satisfying just because I realized, with these kinds of decisions that we're making, when we think about the kind of portfolios that we're in charge of, and especially the kind of portfolios that I manage, being income portfolios, they serve real world purposes for our end customers. They're your regular people, people like my mum and dad who were saving for their retirement. Now they need that money because they've retired. Or people who are in their early to mid 30s and wanting to save for their first home, wanting to build their financial freedom for later on in their lives, wanting to establish financial security for the next generation. Real world investment goals. This is what it's about, right? And the decisions that people like me make when we not only direct where the money goes, which sort of shapes where our future goes, but also we have an influence over the pot of money that we've got carriage over, how that grows to satisfy the needs of our end customers. That's really what it's all about.
I'm working in education. I really like being able to help people make decisions for themselves and the best decisions. So yes, I fully understand that. So Amy, you have 3 children.
I do.
You work full time.
Yeah.
How do you make your life work? And do you have any time for yourself and your husband?
So I both love and hate this question. I love it because it makes me sound like a superwoman, but I hate it for the same reason, because I am not a superwoman. So I I have 3 children. This is true. I have 3 daughters, ages between 3 and 10. So it's a busy house. I have an incredibly good partner in my husband. So when we moved to Australia at the back end of 2016, he was the Aussie coming home. I was the expat coming with no ties, no roots, nothing. And he said, let me look after things at home so that you can get yourself established. Now, when he said that, he didn't mean forever, but it's been a few years now, right? And he's still holding down the fort at home. I would not be able to work full time and pile myself into work the way that I do if it wasn't for his support at home. And by the way, his support at home goes beyond just, changing nappies and doing laundry. He is raising our 3 girls into exactly the type of women that I would want to see them to become in the future. And that's really important. Having a partner that's really aligned in terms of values, in terms of, what does success for this family look like, has meant that I don't need to sit at work being distracted about, what my daughters are up to at school today, whether they're going to be picked up in time, whether they're going to be taken to their activities in time after school. I don't need to worry about any of that. I just need to, I don't even need to worry about getting home on time, but I have always made it an imperative that I will get home in time for family dinner, because family dinner is more than just about food in our house, and probably in most families, right? It's the one point of the day where you all get to connect as a family. So for me, that's always been very important. I try really hard not to miss family dinners. But the reason I said it's one of these questions that I've grown to love and hate at the same time is I wonder how many men get asked this question, right? If roles were reversed and my husband were the full-time portfolio manager in a large asset management firm and I were the stay-at-home mother, how often would he get asked, you've got 3 children, you've got a full-time job and it seems very intense, how do you make it all work? And so the underlying assumption is that it's women that have to make it all work. And I think, our house by no means is our household perfect. My husband and I have bicker about all the same issues as I'm sure most couples do. But I think we're at least showing our daughters that it's not always the women that have to pick up the slack at home. And quite often I do see, my girlfriends who work full-time, part-time, their husbands also work. I see them picking up more of the fair share at home. And, it's just the way that the world is today. But I do think, and I have great hopes that it's changing. But women have as much of a say in that, I think, as men.
Absolutely. Absolutely we do. And from my perspective, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist and I had to learn to let go.
Yes.
And that I couldn't do everything and it was okay. if the kids didn't put their washing out and they had to wear a pair of dirty shorts to school, it was all right. And then they learnt that they did have to put and I've got a very supportive husband as well. But I think sometimes, when you're in an industry or a role where small details matter, it doesn't matter as much at home. The consequences of you not buying or trading it's not as major if there's no dinner on the table, you can get Uber Eats or, there's other options, right?
Totally. And, when you say, if your kids wear dirty shorts to school, I think, isn't it a big part of letting go that perfectionism is understanding that them wearing dirty shorts to school need not be a reflection on who you are and how good you are as a parent.
No.
Right? That's a key point to letting go of that perfectionism for me, anyway.
Yes, it does not reflect their personality or their behaviour might, but the shorts doesn't matter.
The shorts, yeah.
One other thing that I'm reminded of as we're talking today is I heard recently that a woman say that the most important decision in life is choosing the right partner.
Ooh.
And that's a big financial decision as well. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting because it's actually quite true if you think about it. Because partners can be supportive or not supportive, add friction, add calm, peace, good financially, not good financially, which puts extra burden. And I thought, it's really interesting. You got any thoughts on that?
Yes, and it reminds me of a conversation we had amongst the team just on a breezy Friday afternoon. Somebody was saying about how, it's not that hard. It's not like there's the one for every person out there. I'm sure there are a lot of people. And then I actually controversially responded with, well, I think if you give me 100 people and they're all, within the right age category and all that kind of stuff, I reckon I could probably make it work with 30 of them. And they were all like, what? That's like you reckon 30% of the population of your age, you could make it work. And I said, well, it's when we think about what makes us get into a relationship in the first place, all those like m- all those feelings in the moment, they don't tend to be the feelings that sustain a relationship. The qualities that have sustained at least my relationship with my partner is not that we're completely aligned on our outlook in life and whether I value homework more than he does or laundry, the way that we do laundry, but it's our ability to communicate and work things out. I think that's been the key. So whoever said this to you, choosing your partner is really important. I completely agree, but I also don't think that it's as hard as people make it out to be, like, oh, you've got to find the one, or maybe not the one, but there aren't that many people that you can completely get on with. I think as long as you can figure out a good way of making communication flow in your relationship, then you've solved so many of your problems before they've even begun, right?
Very nice. Very nice. So talking again about your lifestyle, what do you do for yourself? Where in your week do you make time for yourself, and what do you do to relax?
I make time for myself every day. Every day is and it's quite important to me because I'm wired as an introvert. And to me, being an introvert, it just means it's not that I'm overly shy, at least not anymore talking to people, but I get my energy, I get to recharge by being on my own. And so, the question that you actually asked earlier, how do you and your husband make sure to make time for yourselves? First and foremost, because he's an introvert as well, we just make sure we have enough time to go to our separate corners at the end of the day to recharge. That's how we recharge. And then we might regroup later on. And in my recharging, you know what? I've been a really big fan of just anything to do with music my whole life. And again, a part of my personality that was not allowed to properly flourish, I suppose, being a first generation immigrant. My dad was like, oh, music is not going to make you money. And I know you want to be a pop star, but I'm sorry, kid, it's just not going to happen. But to this day, I'll tinker a little bit on the guitar, on the piano. I'll I'll listen to songs. I'll play songs for a bit. We have an electric drum kit at home as well. I'll put the headphones on because the kids are asleep, and I'll bash out alongside to a few tunes. I do things like that. That's how I unwind.
Oh, that sounds great. And just thinking about if you had your career now or you were starting over in finance, have you got any tips for women starting out that might be thinking, how do I navigate this, or how do I navigate difficult situations? Certainly in my career, I've had some unwanted attention, and it's difficult trying to navigate that. Have you got any thoughts or suggestions?
Yeah, so in my 20s, I would say these difficult situations that I dealt with them very differently to how I deal with them now. So just thinking off the top of my head, in my 20s, the trading floor was a lot more testosterone-y and aggressive, right? I don't know what it's like now. I haven't been on one recently, but it was sweary, it was loud, and I would just pretend that it didn't matter, that it didn't affect me. But of course it did. Like being sworn at in any situation, it hurts one's feelings. It definitely hurt mine. But pretending it wasn't happening or ignoring that it wasn't affecting me, I don't think it really did me any good. And it definitely didn't show any signs to the people exhibiting these behaviors that it was not okay. But I never felt empowered in my 20s to be able to speak up. Now, looking back, I wish I did feel more empowered. And what would have led me to feel more empowered is if people more senior around me had stood up and spoken up. And then I would have spoken up for myself as well. I just knew that I was going to get shot down if I spoke up. So now, these days, I'm obviously a lot more senior in the industry. The industry has softened massively as well. So, not most places, hopefully, are not at all sweary. But I call things out, even the smallest of things. When I hear discussions on the team of people saying, are people confusing sexism with unconscious bias? I'll even call that out. When the guys on the desk suddenly go, uh, okay, well, those girls in marketing, and I'll say, hey, they're not girls, they're women. And the reason I am able to do this now is I have a lot more confidence. I'm older. I'm more senior. And then again, I hope me doing this means that other younger or more junior women throughout the organization. Here's Amy Xie Patrick, a more senior person in the organization, going, "Hey, they're called women. Thank you very much, not girls." And then eventually, you say that enough, and they start calling themselves women when they get addressed as girls, and eventually, the leadership within the organization starts addressing teams of women as women rather than girls. And that's how it changes, right? That's how this change sort of snowballs and rolls.
I think it's so important that senior women call it out, because young women, you started on the trading floor, you were straight out of university. You're not given those skills at university on how to deal with that sort of attention, or it's really awkward. So, but there is no right or wrong way. But I guess learn from any experience that you have and think after the experience, how could I have handled that better and what could I have said? And perhaps reach out to senior women in your organisation or HR that might be able to give you some tools to manage.
Tools to manage, absolutely. And I think that's a huge point, Liz, that you just made. It's about finding allies, right? We will all feel stronger if we feel like there are other people on our side. And what I was lacking in my 20s was allies. I was the only woman on female trader on the trading floor. There were no allies, and we all need more allies. And this is why we need more women in the financial industry. We need to feel like we can reach out to allies.
Very nice. Really lovely summary.
It's such a lot to unpack, right? If I could talk to my 21-year-old self, these are probably some of the things that I would say. I would say, look, this financial industry business, you seem to want to go here, but have you figured out why? Because at 21, I hadn't figured out why. I was there because that's where the conveyor belt took me. I was there because that's where my father expected me to be. I didn't really understand what my role or my purpose was there. Figure out why you even want to be in the industry that you've chosen. It doesn't even have to be finance, right? Wherever you think that you need to be headed, be clear on why you're headed there. And maybe one of the things that could then help you from that point on, so you're clear on why you're there. For me, I would have said, second of all, understand all the different facets of what the financial industry are about, because there are so many different roles within this industry. And most of them you don't even know about. All I'd seen by the age of 21 is you can be handed a trading book or you could work for a hedge fund. That was pretty much it. But there is so much more to it than that. And here I'm going to bring out probably another piece of psychology, but it's modern and it's applicable. And the idea traces back to author Jim Collins. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he sort of coined this idea of a hedgehog, and he talks about, what is a hedgehog? Well, a hedgehog is this, spiky little animal that doesn't really have any other defenses other than being spiky, right? And it gets attacked by all kinds of things. So, for example, a fox would come and attack a hedgehog, and a fox is really wily. It's really clever. It's got all these different ways that it can try to attack the hedgehog, and the hedgehog just knows one thing: roll up into a ball. And as long as it's in a ball, it can't really be gotten to. Like it's not vulnerable. And so it does one thing, but one thing really, really well. And so his point is we all could do with finding our hedgehogs. So early on in your career, how do you do that? You find the overlapping bit of 3 areas. The first area is, what am I really passionate about? So for me, it's not investing. I said that at the beginning, but it's about my passion lies in wanting to learn things so that I can improve. Not because I'm aiming for perfection, but because improvement makes me feel like I'm moving, right? And that's all it's really about. So my passion has always been embracing the area that's slightly outside of my comfort zone. And that just already covers so many different aspects in industries. And then the second one is, what can you really excel at? Now, that doesn't mean what can you be the best at, because if that's the definition, then we'd all give up. I mean, in most things, there's only one best, right? But it's more just, what are you wired for? So again, for me, I think it's all the things about psychology that I've talked to you about today. It's about being able to break things down, work out why things really work the way that they do, why humans work really the way that they do, and find ways to apply that. So when I do it within my role, what I find it also gives me the ability to excel at is to articulate my investment views, the way that I run my portfolio, my investment decisions, my investment process. And when I can articulate it really well, and especially in fixed income, as you know, it's full of jargon, right? Things like duration and default and CDS and all these. If I can break it down free of jargon to an advisor sitting across the table who tells me fixed income is something that I've never been able to get my head around, that's already excelling relative to most of the industry in fixed income. So that's where I found that I can excel at. And then the last thing is, it has to be economical, right? You have to be able to make money off of the things that you're passionate about and that you can excel at, because I can be as passionate as I want to be about, I don't know, drawing kookaburras. But really, am I going to be able to make an economic engine out of that? No. But when I can make portfolios that make a real life difference, positive impact to people's true financial goals, real life financial goals, there's a market for that, right? And I can make a living off of that. So finding your hedgehog, finding the overlapping areas of where these 3 things come together. And, I only recently heard this from Jim Collins, but I just think it's such a beautiful way to illustrate how to sort of put your mindset in the right place early on in your career is identifying that. So write a list of all the things that you're passionate about, then write a list of all the things that you can excel at, and then think of, can any combination of these things be economical? And maybe then take your career from there.
Have you undertaken any further study, since economics?
Not at all. Only the study that's been required from a regulatory perspective of being in this industry, but I've never felt like I've needed to. So I know that recently in our industry, having a CFA is highly desirable, and I see some of the stuff that some of the content that it involves, and it's just mind-boggling, just the sheer volume of stuff that you have to learn. But again, in terms of what has been applicable, like most jobs, this job in finance for me has been about learning as I do, learning as I go. And the things that I can fold back into my practice of investing from either the mistakes I make along the way, the mistakes that other people make along the way, or even just the successes that I have along the way. I think it's just as important to look at the times when you've been successful and acknowledge how much of it was your doing and how much of it was luck, because that luck you have no control over as well. So that's my study, really. It's nothing formal. I don't have any other letters after my name. But this is how I choose to continue improving.
And have you had a mentor along the way, and are you mentoring anyone?
I have a mentor in Australia, and I've been asked in formal and informal mentoring programs as well. And when I reflect upon mentoring, I think the best mentors I've had in my career have never told me what to do, have never tried to teach me what they know. They've been really good at listening. So, really good, active, and intent listeners. They've been really vital in holding a mirror up to myself, showing me all the parts, whether I like them or I dislike them. They've been really key to giving me the belief in myself when I've doubted and being able to provide that objectively. So, one of the things that my mentor said to me a couple of years ago, he put me up for a job recommendation, which in the end I didn't take. But I was on the phone to him talking through, the details of this job. And then towards the end, I said, hey, it's really great. And I really appreciate that you recommended me for this role. But why have you been my mentor all this time? Like, why do you back me? And he said, because you're very clear on what you know and what you don't know. And you'd be amazed at how many people go through life just not understanding the difference, not taking the time to be clear about what you don't know. And it's only when you're clear about what you don't know that you can do something about it. Do I want to know? Does knowing change? Will knowing change how well I do my job? And once I know, what will I do with that knowledge? All of these things start from knowing what you don't know. And I never knew that about myself. But because he reflected it up to me as a mirror, it then gave me newfound confidence that, you know what, Amy, you've got this, right? You might not want this job, but wherever you're going, I reckon you've got this because you're very clear on what you don't know. And I was like, yeah, I have generally been able to say I don't know when I don't know.
Excellent. What are your career aspirations now?
This sounds very grandiose, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'd love to leave a legacy. And I don't mean I want to leave a legacy of being the most star fixed income fund manager ever to have lived. But I'd like to leave a legacy in this industry of showing all kinds of future investors, whatever gender, whatever color, whatever background you've come from in life, that there's something here for everyone. I'd love to leave a legacy of breaking down this very boys' club culture that we have, especially in the investment industry. And to do, by being given the opportunity of recording podcasts like this with you, Liz, I think it gives me the opportunity to tell the story of just how rich and rounded the skill set it is that you have to be able to really do well in this industry, right? And so that's what my career aspirations are. It's not to be. I mean, I'd love it if I went down in history as the best fixed income fund manager ever, but I'd really like to be known as Amy Xie Patrick, the woman that showed the world that the financial industry is open for all.
That's lovely, and I think that's a perfect way to end our discussion today. Thank you so much for joining us, Amy. I've really enjoyed chatting to you. And
thank you for the opportunity, Liz. It's been great.
It's wonderful. It's celebrating women in finance and International Women's Day, and we hope you'll come back again, Amy.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you for joining us this week on Fixated, the Fixed Income Podcast. Still hungry for more fixed income news, views and education? Then visit fixedincomenews.com.au and don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter to have the latest news delivered right to your inbox. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Elizabeth Moran and we'll see you next episode on Fixated, the Fixed Income Podcast.